Joining me now for his analysis of the day's events, big issues on the international stage, and of course, plenty here at home, as you've just seen. They're coming out of Canberra. Sky News Political Editor Andrew Clennell. Andrew, this afternoon, the Prime Minister, alongside Defence Minister Peter Dutton, announced $70 million in lethal aid and a further $25 million in humanitarian aid for Ukraine. In a strong statement from the PM, he reaffirmed that Australia will always stand up to bullies. Now, the Prime Minister, Andrew, was coy about how this money will be spent. I know some in the media have been critical about his lack of detail, but I've been there in government at this sort of point again. We're talking about weaponry. I don't think we need to telegraph to the enemy exactly what we're going to provide, subject, of course, to the usual probity rules inside government, surely.
Yes, well, I mean, as journalists, we try and seek more information, so that's where that comes from. I guess the issue is, it sounds like these aren't missiles on Australian soil, from my chat to Andrew Hastie this afternoon. It sounds like we're buying them from another power to be used. Mm-hmm. So I guess the question arises, could the other power just send them? But fair enough, we need to be showing that we're joining the fight, and that is what the PM is doing.
Look, I would suspect we'll be buying them out of Europe or close to Europe. They are needed almost yesterday. So I think your assumptions there, I don't suspect they're coming out of our arsenal. Before we get into some other issues, I've got to pick up this interview you did with Christina Keneally this afternoon. Now, this, I'll remind viewers, is the woman who'll be in charge of border security, home affairs, if Labor gets elected in a few weeks' time. I was shocked by this comment.
Of course, we're led by Anthony Albanese, former Deputy Prime Minister, more than 25 years in the Parliament and experience across a broad range of portfolios, including at cabinet level on national security matters.
At cabinet
level. Now, mate, that is a bald-faced lie. A bald-faced lie. It's completely false. Albanese has never had a national security-related portfolio in cabinet. Never. Not defence, not AGs, not foreign affairs, not home affairs. They're the national cabinet portfolios. He might have sat in there perhaps as DPM, Deputy Prime Minister, but he's never had those national security portfolios. That's a complete fib. All he's ever been at cabinet level is a Minister for Infrastructure, Minister for Regional Affairs. Does she think we don't pick this stuff up?
Well, what she's saying there is he was in the room, he was in the cabinet when national security decisions have been made, but that is very different to the National Security Committee of Cabinet. So it is what the government's trying to say, and it has some weight, is that people like Morrison and Dutton and so forth just have a lot more of experience of those discussions at that high level of those difficult decisions than the Labor team. And it is a strength for them as they come into the election. Now, Labor might say, well, you know, was Tony Abbott in the National Security Committee of Cabinet when he was Health and Employment Minister, but it doesn't really matter. It's Labor's traditionally seen as weaker on national security, and so I see that back. She's being clever with her words. She says he has experience at national security at cabinet level, meaning he was just sitting in cabinet. Well, that's a bit different to being on that very important
but that's everybody.
Committee. Exactly.
Even the most junior. And actually, I'll pick her up on this. The decisions on national security are actually not taken in the cabinet room. They're actually taken in the National Security Committee of Cabinet, and it's one of the only, if not the only, committee of cabinet that does not require its decisions to be relitigated and endorsed by the broader cabinet. So in fact, he has no idea about these issues, and I think she's showing Labor's glass jaw there, the fact that she had to sort of bolster his credentials. That tells me the government's attack, perhaps, if not working, is certainly making Labor a bit nervous. Let's go to these floods.
And just
huge
quickly
story
on that
out of northern New South Wales.
Peter, just on that, he was Deputy Prime Minister for 2.5 months. So let's not forget that. It wasn't a long period that he was... 2.5 months worth of
NSC sitting in there.
Yeah, exactly. So it's hardly worth mentioning.
Yeah, as I said, I am going to keep her honest. She's not always honest. These floods, we know tens of thousands of Australians are having a pretty torrid time. We saw those horrible images of people stranded on their roofs last night in and around Lismore. The PM's been out there, he's offered support to Queensland and New South Wales. There's already been 80,000 claims for disaster support. We know that there's $4.8 billion in a federal disaster relief fund. Apparently that's not being used now. Are we confident there's enough support out there in the community?
All the signs are, Peter, that Scott Morrison has learnt the lessons from the fires and he is approaching an election, and that the people who are suffering from these dreadful floods will be treated a lot better than the people who were involved in those bushfire tragedies. So, you know, the problem a lot of the time is going to be under insurance or that the insurers don't cover things. So then you have to think carefully about how taxpayer money should be spent. But nevertheless, I think you have to be quite generous to people who find themselves in these situations. And I know the Prime Minister's told the New South Wales Premier whatever support is required will be forthcoming from the federal government. So I think we'll see that. But yes, I mean, that $4 billion, well, it has to go to something. I mean, even if it's just flood and fire mitigation, let's do something with it, because obviously these events are becoming more common. But the other difference between this and the Black Summer, it seems to me, is the speed with which they got defence in there. And you saw those pictures, you saw the brave and important work they are doing, saving lives. And doing so in a way that the SES, which is a volunteer organisation, cannot do, and that fire and rescue, etc., don't have the resources to do. So I think there's a marked difference in Scott Morrison's reaction on this to previous natural disasters. He's learnt the lessons.
I think you're absolutely right there. Andrew Clennell, thank you for your time.